So you're going to have all these different parts of your grant proposal when you submit it, and of course, we're doing this piece by piece. But I think we talked through all these parts so far, a little bit about the timeline, and I just wanted to chat about the budget briefly because some of y'all may not have written a budget before, and might wonder kind of, what are the steps to doing that? How do you want to go about doing that? And so I just want to mention a couple things that, like the rest of your grant proposal, the budget, like the more detail you can go into, the better, because it kind of, it lets the reviewers know that you've kind of thought through your process the whole way. So as much detail as you can give, the better. And we talked about this idea of in-kind support. And we have a template for this I'm going to show you in just a second. But just thinking kind of conceptually, one thing that you want to do is to list in-kind support. Do you remember what that was that we talked about? What's in-kind support? Say that again? Yeah, good. So anything that you're providing that's going to help get the project done. Yeah, so these are things that essentially the funding agency doesn't have to pay for. So if you've got equipment that you're going to use, that's awesome. I think we mentioned if you have like some volunteers that are going to help with the project, that's awesome. So in your budget, you can list those things too. You can list, okay, I'm asking for like $1,000 for my project, but I've got 10 volunteers that are going to contribute 20 hours a piece, right? And so that'd be 200 hours. And then, I know UNCA's kind of minimum hourly student wage is about $10 an hour. So however you want to apply that then to value it. So that can essentially say, hey, look, that's $2,000 that I'm contributing to get this project done that the funding agency doesn't have to provide. So so be sure and list that. So even in your budget, you want to list all the things you need for your project. So that'll include things that you're asking for money for, but then also things that you don't have to ask money for. And as I mentioned before, the Gillette Foundation does not require this, but there are some organizations that ask for matching funds. And so one way to show that is like with your in-kind support, that kind of thing. In general, when we're writing grants, we need to be a little bit flexible with budgets because sometimes funders will negotiate things. And so you want to be careful, right? You don't want to make your budget look overly grandiose because that could scare off the funders. But you want to be able to have a little bit of wiggle room too in how you're looking at it. So some things that people might ask themselves when they're reviewing your budgets, you want to walk a line, right? So the first thing is, are your costs reasonable? So if the costs are too high, then they might not fund it because they think it's too expensive. But the other thing that's almost worse is if you don't ask for enough money, right? So if you have a very small budget and you get that grant, then it's like, oh, darn it, how am I going to do this with this small amount of funding now? So, it can kind of show sort of unfamiliarity with the project if we ask for too little money too. It was interesting when we were going over to Nepal, we asked for funding from several different sources, and myself and my collaborator, we had the conversation like, how much money would we need to be able to go over and do this? And we kind of got lucky, and we hit on all three of the grants we applied for, but we had to ask the question, well, if we just got one of these grants, like could we do it? And the answer was it'd be really tough to do. So we would have been in this situation otherwise of probably having to say, because these grants had monetary limits of how much you could ask for. So we would have been in the position of, possibly having to decline the grant, which would have been a bummer. So, yeah, so you want to be sure to ask for enough money so you can do it if you get the grant without too much trouble. And then the detail and explanation is always important. Now, when you're making your budget, one thing I've told folks is, I'm not expecting something, I'm not expecting you to obviously to go out and acquire actual estimates for the work or something like that. But a general guideline is if If you can find something out on the internet in about 5 minutes or so on a topic, like that's all that you need to do. So if you're looking to rent, say, some earth moving equipment, right, or something, just go online, the first ballpark estimate for it that you find, go ahead and use that. So I'm not looking for as much detail here as you know, if this were an actual grant program. I just kind of want you to go through the exercise here. So you're not gonna kind of scrounge to keep the cost down as much as you would in some other things. But these are questions, right? So can it be accomplished with a budget? Are those costs too high or too low? And if I were to recommend something, I would say put the cost a little bit on the high end, just in general. Because number one, it might end up costing more than you think. And number two, you want to leave yourself a little bit of wiggle room. There's more consequence for asking for too little money than for too much money. So when you're using your estimates, always go a little bit on the high end with your budget. Okay? And the other thing were supporting materials. And so these are things that you can add onto your grant proposal that strengthen it. Did we discuss supporting materials at all? I was thinking that we didn't. So these are all sorts of things that aren't part of the grant application itself or aren't part of the required materials, but they strengthen your application. So these can be things like permits, like letters of support. Any other ideas? What kind of documents would strengthen your application to show that you're able to do a project? Any thoughts? So these could be like letters of agreement. So like if you're wanting to partner with like a middle school to do like an educational activity, then you'd want a letter of support from that middle school. If you were going to work with a community organization to plant a community garden, you'd want a letter from the community organization saying, hey, we're excited about this project. Supporting materials kind of show your networks and show your connections. If you were going to use facilities at UNCA, you'd want a letter from UNCA saying, you know, we give permission to use these resources. So those kinds of things. And so any kind of permits or certifications that you have, like if you're going to do a community garden and you've got like a permaculture, you've done like a permaculture course, or, you know, you're working with someone who's a master gardener, or those kinds of things. Like supporting materials are things outside of the application that can really kind of strengthen your case and show that you've sort of done your homework. Now, for our purposes, I'm not going to ask you to make like a mock letter with like fake letterhead and all that. Like you don't need to do that. All I'd like you to do is like list like what the supporting materials would be. So like letter from middle school that I'm partnering with, like letter of support from like permaculture certified friend who's going to oversee the design. Or so just kind of list what those supporting materials could be. I'm not going to ask you to like write out a bunch of like mock letters, but so just think like what would be some of those materials that might strengthen your application a bit. Any questions on the supporting materials? I'm going to pull up our budget template just so you'll see kind of how I want you to line that up. But any questions on this? Cool. Maybe it was. I don't know. Do you guys notice how computers ask things more politely than they used to? Is it possible that ChemDraw could have been removed, renamed, or deleted? I mean, yeah, it's possible. I mean, anything's possible, really. But funny you should ask. So this is the budget template, which is on our Moodle page. And it's just something that you'll include into your grant proposal. If it were me, so if you're writing, say, a Google Doc and you want to like include this table in there, how would you go about doing that? What are the ways you would do that? So just copy and paste the cells? Could do that, yeah, could do that. Yeah, yeah, so it's kind of two ways, yeah.
You could just take like the calculation and transfer it to like a more like a less table.
So if you wanted to, yeah, so like create a a table like in your Google Doc. Yeah, does Google Docs let you insert a table the same way that Word does?
Yeah, super easy. And you can even like what I do a lot is you can just make like the grid line white, and so it just looks like really like there's not a lot of like stuff going on.
Cool. And will it do the calculations for you and stuff? Once you do that? Maybe not. Okay. I haven't messed around with it. It might. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple ways you could do it. You know. So this spreadsheet, the way it's set up, is it'll do just a couple of small calculations for you. So it's got kind of 10 serial numbers here. You can write in the name of the item. You know. So if we put, I don't know, we're doing a community garden. We're gonna have we'll call it gardening equipment. And function, we'll just say till soil, plant as well, or however you want to say that. So you can adjust any of these cells as you go. And then I ask you for a supplier. So this is just to kind of show that you've done your homework as far as finding actual prices for this. So I don't know, maybe you went online to Amazon or whatever. Jeff Bezos doesn't have enough money yet, so we should buy from Amazon as much as you can. Let's see. So in this case, with just plain gardening equipment, this cost per unit and unit would be a little bit vague. So I might say something in here like, I don't know, shovels, spades. And let's just say that unit, let's say piece. Let's say that this costs, I don't know, let's just say it's $20 per piece. And let's say that we're going to buy 5 of them. So it'll multiply it out here for me, right, into my cost. And then it'll keep a running grand total here. And then let's say seed packets. Let's say we're going local on this one. How much do seed packets cost at Sochi Seed? Let's say they're like $5. How do you want to do it? Let's say we're going to buy 10 of those. And it'll keep a running total here. So, yeah, so one thing you could do is you could just copy all these cells and paste them into your Google Doc. I don't know what'll happen, but one thing you could do that would make it a little easier, like you can save this thing as a PDF and then like take a snapshot of it. And then you wouldn't have to worry about any of the format getting changed. So you can do something like come in here, throw this on the desktop as a PDF, just for instance. This doesn't give the same options that my PDF gives me. But you can come in here and, does this not have Adobe on it? Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that's got Adobe on it. Come on, man. You can do this, Adobe. Then you can come in here, you can take a snapshot. No, I don't really care. When you do that, then you don't have to worry about how it's formatted. So you could come into Word or something, whatever you're doing, just paste that like this, and it's gonna look just the way it did. It won't mess with your formatting at all. Now, the one thing it did was it snipped my grant total, so I need to adjust my page breaks, but yeah. So anyway, so some folks ask, like, how do I integrate this into my document? So yeah, you can either, as Molly said, you could either create a spreadsheet within your Google Doc and then enter it, or you could just do everything in here, make it a PDF, take a snapshot, copy and paste. That's probably the simplest way. And then if you've got a lot of in-kind costs and things like that, in-kind contributions, I would do two of these, right? So one is the money you're asking for, and one is the other in kind. So you can kind of compare those two. Because otherwise, you could put it all in here if you wanted, but you need to do a couple more complicated calculations. You could have like the grant total, and then subtract in-kind contributions, and then like have total requested or something like that. So you could play with that a little bit. But that's the format that I'm looking for the budget in. So any questions about the budget?
What's the best way to
Best way to what?
estimate the cost of labor?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, the minimum that UNCA will pay is about $10. And then if if it's a more skilled position, like, yeah, I don't know, what kind of things were you thinking of? Did you have like a skilled position in mind, or? Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I just kind of look around on the internet, like if 10 is kind of your lowest, and if you're going to be working on this project, be sure and pay yourself as well. And we're not going to get into any of the things that, like, paying fringe benefits, all those kinds of things, which, like, if we ask for grant money from UNCA and we're going to pay someone, like, we have to calculate some other things. So we wouldn't think about those. But yeah, I would just kind of look on the internet, like, do your best estimate. And if you have experience, you can ballpark it. What's a living wage? Is like 15? What's the number? 17. So if you want to use that as a guideline, that would be a good way to do it as well. This has gotten real small now, but if you wanted to put a note below your budget and say something like cost of labor based on living wage in Asheville at $17 per hour, something like that, you could do that. And yeah, and then if you're hiring, someone who has particular skills, certifications, then, bump that up, and yeah, probably depend. Like if they were an environmental science specialist, then the rate goes way up because, those people are in demand. Cool. So any questions on the budget and what that's going to look like? So that'll just be copied into your proposal itself. And then your proposal altogether will be a PDF that you'll email out. But so, yeah, I would, I don't know. For me, I just make it a PDF and take a snapshot, because that way you don't have to worry about any weird formatting and stuff. Super fast. And you can use this to do all of your math for you. Nice. Okay, so I think that's all that I want to talk about as far as that's concerned. So, so how are things going? How are thoughts about topics and that kind of thing going? I haven't heard from folks as far as topics go, so I guess that means we're moving along. Yeah, Deanna. Yeah. Cool. So things worked out at the Forest Service. Awesome. Congrats. Oh, I mean, as detailed as you can get it. Like if you're not, if you're not able to figure out, so you're thinking of doing like a project, like with some funding, like from the place where you're doing your internship, or? Yeah. I mean, so I guess if you're, yeah, I don't know. Well, so I guess if you, so they have fun. So I guess it's all a place where you want to send it, then, kind of let them drive the train as far as that goes. But otherwise, just as much detail as you can get. I mean, if you're, I don't know, if you're going to be traveling to sites to do hemlock woolly adelgid work, get a sort of a ballpark estimate on that. So that's an interesting thing that might come up if you're going to be traveling to sites. UNCA charges about 50 cents a mile for minivans, and you can find other estimates online or things. But so if you're going to be, so that's one thing where you might have like specific details based on where you're working. They might have a different rate. But, if you can tell me, 10 trips at 50 miles a piece for 500 miles times, 50 cents per mile will be 250. Like if you could do that, that's awesome. And you have those details and it's not a lot of work. Because really, I want this budget to be more kind of an intellectual thinking exercise than like not, so if you can get to them easily, do it. But if it's going to require calling folks up and emailing and this and the other, I wouldn't worry about that. But yeah, I mean, as much detail as you can get to without too much struggle. How's that for vague, like gray? Other folks, thoughts on wherever you are in this process, whether it's coming up with a topic, whether you're starting to do, find some sources and review them. How's this process going so far? Where are y'all at? And it's okay if you're still in the thought process. That's all right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I didn't realize that we had to write a grant proposal based on my first seminar. So I'm like brainstorming, I guess.
Yeah. So like on recycling, yeah, I don't know, like what's something you'd like to do to kind of promote recycling? Anything that comes to mind?
I didn't also think about like changing it up.
Which is fine, yeah.
I don't really know what I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like kind of think like what would people want to spend money on that is helpful.
So that's one way to go about it, Yen. And another way is to go about thinking about like, what would I really like to do to help this issue, and it's good when those two meet, right? Thinking of like, what do they want to fund? What do I want to do? But, since this is kind of, you may end up submitting this, but since this is maybe not necessarily something you're going to fund away, I might start the other way. Like what's something that you really want to do? Like if you could have money from someone to go and promote recycling, like what would you do? Yeah, and it's different in the county and the city. Like the one that contracted for the county out of Florida, they're like, they need to get like kicked to the curb, pun intended. But like, yeah, that might be interesting, like researching that. You can do that. You could also do something like an education project that like educates people on recycling. You could, yeah, I mean, Yeah, my.
I was gonna say, I know you like mentioned that you could do like larger scale hard to recycle event or something. And I know it'll probably offer to do more, maybe like at like 40 copies.
That could be cool. Yeah, and honestly, Greenworks might be kind of psyched to have you help organize one on UNCA or something. So yeah, I think any of those would be awesome. And I know Don Chavez, at least, that sometimes has been organizing those hard to recycle events, and she's awesome and might be able to help you out with like, and it might not cost much at all, which would be cool, you know, because folks often donate time and energy and space, those kinds of things. And so you mentioned like picking another topic, which is totally cool. But the one thing we want to avoid is the panic that sets in of like not having a topic and it's due soon. So I think in some sense, there's probably a bunch of topics that you could do, but picking one of those earlier on in the game is probably worth more than waiting to the last minute to be like, to wait for that bolt of lightning and be like, oh, this is my topic. Like pick one of the things that you're kind of interested in researching. And so, yeah, like I said, so 3 really cool ideas right off the bat. You could, it might be more work, but if you could, you know, think about a business plan for like, you know, providing large scale recycling to the city, you could do an I came up with maybe the path of least resistance, like just doing like an education program at UNCA or somewhere else, could be a school, or planning a hard to recycle event. Like all those would be really cool. And all those would give you a chance to delve a little deeper into the topic as well, potentially. And then each of those might have a little bit of a different annotated bibliography associated with them. Like you might want to get into some of the costs and benefits and like how do the economics work of these recycling programs? Why is it that recyclers end up putting the recycling in the trash? Well, probably because it would cost them more to recycle them than they would make from it, right? So how do you work out those economics? Like, so yeah, any of those I think would be really cool. So maybe just pick one and roll with it, you know? I don't know about y'all. I do my best work when I'm not stressed and under the gun. Like my most creative work, like just kind of like plug and chug stuff, like I can do under the gun, not sleeping, right? But like creative, new way to think about things, approaches that interest me, connecting the dots. Like I do that work a lot better when the due date is not at like 5 o'clock that day, you know? So I think a lot of y'all in your first homework writing assignment talked about like time management, which we all think about. Like I think about it, you know. And I think one of the keys to effective time management is just like knocking out the simple stuff, you know, first. And so give yourself some time, you know, with those electronics off, just sitting at a desk thinking about your topic, like what gets you excited, right? And, you know, what's something you'd like to do. And so that kind of work always happens earlier on. So yeah, as far as topics go, if you can pick one that interests you early on, I think it benefits you for sure. How about other folks? Where are y'all at in this process? And it's okay if you're thinking about topics too. That's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
So for our annotated bibliography, do we just need to use like peer-reviewed articles, or can we use like blog posts and other?
Yeah. So I've got some guidelines on that, Jaden. I can't remember right off the number. I think it's, where was I just looking at that? Was it the call for proposals? So as far as like the grant proposal ultimately is concerned, so it's asking for 15 sources, including 10 from the peer-reviewed literature. So like, you know, those other 5 can be anything. And yeah, I'd encourage you to use like, yeah, because peer-reviewed literature is great for like, what are the facts? What do we know, right? But like creative new approaches, like, yeah, like blog posts, all those kinds of things are awesome. Yeah. So yeah, diversity of sources are great. Um,
If I learn something from a conversation from my son, if I'm just learning something, I would probably cite that.
oh yeah. So if it were me, um, as much as I love and trust other scientists, I would ask them for their source. I'm like, oh man, that's really cool. Like, where did you learn that, right? Because then that allows you to go back and you can do that. You know, you can. I mean, so the bottom line is in citing things is you want to cite it in a way that the person who reads it can go and find that source. So say you had a conversation with, you know, D or Irene or whoever, you could say, you know, a conversation with Dr. D. Eggers, you know, Associate Professor of Environmental Studies, this date. And that's fine, but like an even stronger source would be, you know, if she tells you, oh yeah, so like I read this over here, like you might want to check it out, and then you can go to that original source, and so then that's a more authoritative source. So those conversations are often great ways as far as like leading us, like back to the facts or back to the original data itself. So if you want to cite conversation, that's fine. I think it probably goes without saying, like, we wouldn't want to base like a lot of our argument on conversations, but if, you know, and if that conversation is so great that you want to cite it in your grant, like, yeah, man, I'd be like, hey, like D, like, where'd you learn that? That's cool. Like, I'd like to read that myself too, or whoever it is. So I think, like, as much as possible, we want to go back to the original sources. But if it's something they learned, like maybe it's something that they learned from planting stuff in their garden and learning something, like that's totally cool, because that's like, that's the source then. So in that case, so go to the writing pointers that I've posted on Moodle for actually citation formats. But the bottom line in any citation format is that the reader can track down the original citation. So in the case of a conversation, to say who it was, when, then that would be cool. Yeah, yeah. So this is the call for proposals, which I handed out, and I think it's on Moodle as well. But it should also be in your folder. But I think, let me look. Well, if it's, oh yeah, of course, learn online. Anyway, I'll look on there, make sure it's not on there if it is, but it should be. But I definitely handed it out as well. But if by some chance someone wasn't there, it should be up there. Yeah. How about other folks? Where are you at this process? What's the current hurdle that you're working over? Say that again? Oh, I guess I'm just thinking like grant proposal right now is, I guess, kind of what I was thinking of. So yeah, topic for next seminar. Yeah, keep them coming. I haven't looked at the spreadsheet. I don't know if there are any ones there. But how about the grant proposal? Sometimes conversations just make us realize that, like, oh yeah, I got to get working on that. And in that spirit, if y'all don't have any other questions, this is a time that we do have. So it said in-class writing time on our syllabus. We have another one of those days. The other one of those days, would it be helpful for y'all if I reserved a room with like computers to write in, or would you just as soon bring like a laptop to here? What's your preference? Would it be useful to reserve a room with computers? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Because I kind of like those days, so like I can be here when you're working. So if you have questions about stuff, like we can kind of. And sometimes one person has a question and it helps someone else who's like not there yet, but we'll be there. So yeah. So I apologize. Gosh, I was looking at my syllabus this morning, like, gosh, this is the only week that I didn't send out one of those like this week in emails, because my Sunday was crazy. And then I'm like, we were supposed to have. So if I'd send a reminder, y'all could have bought your laptops today, but I did not. So so those of y'all that have them, you're welcome to use the rest of this time, and I can be here as a resource. Those of y'all that don't and your time would best be spent elsewhere, I totally get that as well. So if there aren't any other questions, we can transition into that. Yeah, Clay.
How many, like, I don't know, you kept track, like roughly how many grants have you gotten?
Oh, well, gonna make me feel good. No, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe 10 or so. I don't know. Not as much as I would if I was at a institution that was like all about the research, you know. But yeah, like when I went to Nepal, we got 3, and yeah, I've gotten some from the Forest Service. Well, like for you know, Dr. Laughlin as well, like some Forest Service, Wildlife Resource Commission, EPA when I was in grad school. You know, my biggest lesson from writing grants is like one of my big lessons for all my work in general, which is that I have to start early and like come back to it. Like the summer before, so all the grant deadlines for my work in Nepal, so we were funded by Fulbright, National Geographic, and World Wildlife Fund. And those deadlines were all in the fall. And that summer, I didn't do much else. Like it was like, I was chipping away at those proposals. And I went through this whole process. Like I did an annotated bibliography, you know, I went and like, what do we know about climate change in the Himalayas? What don't we know? Like, what do we know about fishes in these rivers? What don't we know? And my big lesson is just, I work much better when I'm relaxed, thinking creatively, than when I, you know, am under the gun. And so that summer, I spent a lot of time writing, and yeah, and it's awesome when it comes out. But the other thing about grant writing is you got to be detached, because I've also had several that weren't funded. So, and that's kind of, I don't know. My major professor is much better at that than I was. He's like, you spend all this time writing this thing, and you send it off, you forget about it. I'm like, I can't really forget about it when I spend all that much time, but sometimes then it doesn't get funded, and you're like, all right, well, I learned some stuff. Maybe I can take pieces of that and do another grant, you know? But yeah, so I guess, yeah, my biggest advice is like, I don't know, I always like to write really bad first drafts to just get all my, because you know, this has happened to you guys, and I'm sorry, I told you you'd write and I just keep talking. But like, when you have ideas for a paper or something, like you'll be walking across and like a sentence will kind of pop in your mind, like, oh yeah, like, so like, I'll literally like just like write that sentence in like somewhere, and then there'll be another sentence in somewhere, and then like, I'm like, okay, so how do those ideas connect? Like, I could never start writing with like typing the first word in a paper, like I couldn't. Like, my ideas, like maybe first I'll think about something and my methods, and then something about like this. Like I have this whole thing, so we're trying to get our stuff from Nepal published right now, and one journal's like, we're not gonna publish this because it's not of interest to a broad enough audience. So like I'm thinking, how do I make this interesting to a broad audience? And one of the big things is like, it struck me the other day, like freshwater, like a couple of papers, how they connect. And so I have that sentence written in a document and not much else written right now. So like wherever your brain approaches the project, like that's where you can plug into it. And then like and then you're like, oh, well, I haven't thought at all about this area. And so then maybe that does. So I need time. I need my brain to connect with the project wherever it wants to. And you can't do that if it's due the next day, right? Because if it's the next day, you got to have all the sections. So yeah, but I've really enjoyed it. And the best grants are those that like you get students to work on with you, because then like folks benefit. Some of y'all, have any of y'all gotten grants before? Yeah, what'd you get a grant from, Molly? Oh, nice, sweet. Yeah, see, so opportunities. Any other questions or thoughts on that? Yeah, get out there and get to know people, because one of the grants we got with the World Wildlife Fund, this guy in Nepal heard about our work and he's like, we're gonna do something kind of similar. And we're like, oh, well, we could do it if you give us money to do it. And he's like, okay, write us a proposal. I'm like, all right, cool. So like, again, man, I sound like a broken record, but like those professional networks, like meeting people that do similar stuff is like so important. Plus you meet cool friends that way too. So. All right.